Why is the world so angry? If you go to the grocery store and sit in the parking lot for 3 minutes and look at the people going in and out, look at their faces, and you will find that they are walking with so much anger. But why? What is the root of the anger? I'll share a story that illustrates a baseline for where this anger comes from and how I noticed it, show the concepts that create that anger, and then break down how those concepts perpetuate the problem. And then if you stick around, I'll share my experience with how I overcome these problems in everyday life. Let's start with the story. I had the pleasure and the gratifying experience of having a space for my mom to come stay with me for 3 months. This happened 2 years ago. And during those experiences, we shared our struggles, our deep-rooted past that created so much suffering in so many different areas as far as personal relationships, drugs and alcohol, violence, abuse, oppression, all of these things that we experienced from growing up in poverty. And as a result, we both had to find different ways out, but we did it separately because our paths led in different directions. And so for almost 7 years, we were on our own journey to heal from those experiences and that suffering. When she came here for those 3 months, we shared our experiences and we shared our paths to healing. Our experiences developed completely different belief systems. She found healing through the Western religion, and I found healing through Eastern philosophy. Now, I'm not trying to convert you. This story illustrates how two completely different views of reality collide with each other and create so much anger. When she was here, we talked about everything. We talked about her belief systems and Jesus and my experiences with the teachings of Buddha, Yogananda, Hinduism, Tao, everything that you can imagine. But it turns out that we weren't discussing it to share the experience. What we were each doing in our own right was trying to convince the other that we were right. I was trying to convince her that the way I saw it was the correct way. In fact, it got so intense sometimes that I had to just pause the conversation and take a break. And she had to do the same at times. So before I go on to the story, let's understand the core mechanism to this. Let's go down the rabbit hole of what a belief actually is. We as humans connect with other humans from telling stories. And those stories are derived from our experiences, and we assign meaning to those experiences, which creates the story. And that story helps us express our belief in the meaning that we have. Now, when that meaning is disturbed through information, it creates literal vibrations. These vibrations manifest in the way of emotions. I'm sure that everyone can relate to having emotions in this way. You may not have described it this way, but I think that it is a perfect illustration of where the emotions come from. And then as a result of those emotions, we oftentimes take involuntary action, or we react. Now, these reactions and these emotional responses can either be negative or positive, depending on if the information is validating us or contradicting us. We can feel joy and peace and happiness and comfort on one end, but on the other end of the spectrum, then we can feel anger and worry and pride and ego. Neither one is right or wrong. These are the expressions of the information that collide with the meaning that we assign to our past experiences. But here's the cool thing about this is we are inherently, as humans, storytellers. It's our way of describing the way that we experience things or the way that we experience or view reality. that is our way to connect with another human being, is through story. Three people can be in the same situation, in the same experience, but view it completely different and assign very different meanings to it. One person might say, this was a devastating experience, I never want to go through that again. Where another person can say, I learned so much from that uncomfortable situation that I want to do it again, because what more can I find? These are completely different stories, wildly different, but the same experience. This is the fact that people neglect, is that we have a different story to tell, even in the same situation. So even from all the way across the world or all the way across town, experiences are going to be wildly different and expressed through stories very, very different. In fact, we can see these differences of stories across time, across cultures, across civilizations, but we'll get to that. Let's put that on the shelf for now. The crux of the problem, the root of the anger, is the collision of meaning without giving space for other people. In today's society, we prioritize comfort above everything else because we only want our story to be true because it validates our identity, it validates our belief, it validates our meaning, our purpose. And if we're not 100% correct, then there's a chance that we're wrong. So if somebody else who has an entirely different view, then that invalidates our belief. And taking that approach removes us from the ability to connect as humans, because we are so rigid and unwilling to share this story out of fear of being wrong, fear of our belief being changed. So back to the story with my mom and I. We each are right. We each have a different perspective, but we took a stance that only one of us could be right, and therefore the other is inherently wrong. If I so believe that I'm right, then how can she possibly be right too? She has to be wrong for me to be right. And this is the zero-sum game that we've been indoctrinated into believing or inherited through the system of conditioning. There's two main levers that enabled this conditioning. The first one is that science is fact. The second one is that money is God. So let's look at both of these. Science says that if something cannot be measured, then it can't possibly be true. So this leaves belief in the intangible wrong. Or any belief in the intangible is subject to be wrong. And that leaves so much ambiguity in this that anybody can classify anybody's belief system as wrong and their own as right. And this is such a rigid way of thinking. How that came about is because money is God. This is the inversion of abundance. This is scarcity created from the illusion of money. I have to get as much money as I can to survive, but there's only a limited resource of money. And so by doing that, I have to get more than the next person to provide for me and my family. And what happens is this leads to individualistic thinking and separates us from unity and separates us from the stories that we tell. And so only one person can win, or one group of people can win, and the other people have to lose. This bleeds in or transfers into only one of us can be right about our beliefs, about our religion, about our philosophy, and the other people have to be wrong. And in fact, we literally as humans will create dead bodies trying to prove that we are right to validate us or invalidate somebody else. And then we'll climb over those bodies to steal the resources and the money from it. Look at the global collapse right now, the global situation that we're in, the economic failure that we're facing, the infrastructure changes in society right now. Look at the political divides. The same language comes out of both sides, but they literally refuse to listen. They said it a month ago and this person said it today, but they're wrong just because of the group they associate with, just because of the story and the meaning that they have as a group or them as a group. This is a zero-sum game and only one can win. So the science and the money is leading to the ripping apart of human connection. And it's because we take those two as absolute truths. It creates this mentality, this idealism that only one can be right because the person who believes it is true, but nobody else is. Let me reframe this a little bit by going back to the story about my mom and I. It's now 2 years since she had moved in initially in those debates on who was right or wrong. And the conversations are completely different now. We are no longer trying to convince each other because we realize that we can't convince the other person of something they don't want to believe. And so because of that, we're seeing the similarities. And what I found through those now conversations rather than debates and arguments is that both views have the same 12 universal laws written in them. They're just presented different ways. If you've ever done deep inner work and experienced something beyond this world, then you will know how hard and challenging it is to describe those experiences because we don't have the words, the language, the expressions to really share those stories as they are. And as a result, as I mentioned before, stories change across timelines, cultures, locations, everything. And that's why the same truths are expressed in so many different ways because they can't be described through our limited expression of in reality. Those 12 truths are a conversation for another time. But what I'm saying is that they underlie all these different belief systems, all these different views of reality. And so what ended up happening as a result of these conversations is I now look forward to those discussions because my eyes are open to the translation of belief to words. They're so different and they are expressions and stories of the meaning and the purpose that we decide we are. We choose who we are through that. And we choose how to express it through that. To really wrap this up, there's a cylinder. If you look at it from two separate ways, then you're going to see a square on one side and a circle on the other. Both of these are true, but the truth underlies both of them, and it depends on where you're standing that projects a certain view. And so both my mom and I are right. And most people in the world are right because their rightness is rooted in their view of the same truth. We must accept that we can only see a limited perspective of the whole truth because of our bodies, because of these skin suits that we walk in. And when we can do that, then we can accept that somebody else's perspective from their skin suit could also be true. But how can we possibly do that if we don't really know our meaning because we're not grounded in it? And one of the major reasons why we get so emotional and so reactionary to this information colliding with our belief is because we don't intuitively believe that belief. Because if we did, we would allow space for other people to express theirs. And so I have an immersive rebuild. You can join the waitlist to really find out who you truly are. If we don't truly know who we are, we're going to continue to collide and divide us into groups and segments. But we are all of us, on the same planet, in the same reality, together. And so if we fall, we all fall. But it's safe to assume if that is true, then also can be true that if we win together, we all win. And we can do that by listening to the views of other people and allow them to add to our fragmented perspective. But we have to choose it. You have to choose it. If we choose it, is the only way that it will happen. So today, in your life, in every situation, when you hear other people that has differing views from yours, ask yourself, is it possible that I don't have the full story? And would I consider their perspective as well?